So welcome to the Node.js Technical Steering Committee meeting for September 18th, 2019. We'll follow our standard agenda, which was in the issue posted in the TSC repo. So to start with, does anybody have any announcements? Okay, it sounds like we don't have any announcements this week. Moving on to the CPC and board meeting updates. I don't have anything new to report on the board front. The meeting is not this week, but the week after. So again, if there's anything you want to put on to our agenda to discuss at that point, let me know or add it to the board. In terms of the CPC updates, I think the work continues mostly on the governance side of things. I think has been mentioned, there are a few applications which are working their way through, but are still in the quiet period. The travel fund, I think we've discussed here and everybody should be aware of that being moved up. And, I think that's going to be pretty much at the point where it's going to go to the board for approval. I think that's, Myles, anything else from the TSC side you can think of? Sorry, the CPC side?
I guess like the big things that are going on right now are some more discussions around the project proposal process for the foundation. I'd also, like for folks in general, the CPC is rather open. If you don't have the time, totally reasonable and understand it's not what everyone wants to spend time on. But if you, like have opinions about, what other projects should be in the foundation and who should be our peers, the process for choosing them, and potentially participating in those decisions, now would be the time to maybe show up to some of the meetings and potentially self-nominate yourself for the CPC. But, if you're happy trusting the reps that we have to handle all that stuff, there's no pressure. There's no shortage of people to do the work. It's more just, an opportunity to work on this kind of stuff if you're interested.
Yeah, and I think other than the things I've mentioned, I can't think of too many things that directly affect the day-to-day of the Node.js project anyway. Okay, if there's nothing else there, then let's move on to the issues which are tagged for the agenda. The first one is 29207, which is make Control-C print a JS stack trace. I don't know I remember we definitely discussed that last week. It was going to go back into the tracker. Just trying to remember who was the one who was most involved on that side. Yeah, so there was the action. We took the action of, Mateo took the action to basically ask the TSC members to comment on their preferences. It looks like, there's 8 people who've weighed in, or maybe 7 from the TSC who've said, behind an opt-in flag. And if I look at it, 2 people from the TSC who opted in, who basically said with a, always on with an opt-out flag. And then a few people sort of, clarified some variations thereof. So agenda, I'm just seeing who, I can't see who put it on the agenda. I guess really the next step is for that to be, and I guess there is some discussion on whether opt-in and opt-out, which makes sense. So that's continuing. I don't know, is there any comments, thoughts on what we should be doing as the next step on that one? I don't think we have enough of the TSC to do anything to shift direction any more than we have. I guess in that issue, it's really just a matter of the TSC's input's been reflected, and where the discussion goes from there. Okay.
I guess
Yep.
one thing that I could add here, just to make sure we're talking about the Control-C stack trace stuff.
Yep.
I think what would really potentially help here is we have done like user outreach stuff. I think getting feedback from people who write tools, manage tools, people who are using utilities, and potentially like other environments that are maybe bootstrapping or embedding Node could help us make a good decision here. One of the things that I'm personally worried about on this one is that like we have so many CLI utilities that people use all the time, where like you're using Control-C generally as the way to like end that process. So from like a user experience standpoint, if I start having stack traces all the time by default, when I do that, my intuition is that's not a great experience. But the idea of having stack traces on exit, like behind a flag or something like that, seems extremely useful from a debugging perspective. So I would very much be interested in, seeing if my intuition on this aligns with people from the ecosystem, because I know that there's some difference of opinions within the thread itself.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess, do you have concrete suggestions? Are you volunteering to reach out to people? Maybe a mention to the tooling team would make sense.
The tooling team could be a really good, maybe putting this on the agenda of the tooling team. That could be a really great way to get some of that feedback.
I'm going to put that tooling. We'd like your input on this. So let me comment that at least. And can I just tag it? Okay, hold on. Labels. Is there a tooling agenda? Should be. I don't actually see a tooling agenda, so I guess we've at least CC'd the team asking for feedback. So mentioned tooling team. Next step is to get their feedback. Okay, any other discussion before we move on that one? I guess wait a sec, I see somebody has their hand up. Is there?
I had a hand up, but it was basically a question about, is there going to be behind a flag, like it was proposed, and probably the best thing for debugging would be to follow an environment variable for that. So perhaps a flag and an environment variable.
Well, the environment variable node options can always be used to set the flag, right?
Node options is not a good solution for this, I think, because it would block usage of node options. I think that it would be better to have a separate variable that could be set like for all the apps in someone's RC file.
I mean, you could like it wouldn't work any differently from any other environment variable.
Yes.
Like node options, okay, sure, people can interfere with that, but it's the same when somebody starts the process with a clean new environment or something.
The thing with node options is that when someone tries to use node options to achieve something else, that flag would be reset. And so because of that, we probably you'll need just a separate flag there. And
yeah. I mean, so go ahead.
That's an issue with like how people use node options in general, right? Not
yes.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that I think that environment flag would be the best kind of solution here, and it would cover almost all the use cases for this thing. And like I don't think if we had that behind an environment flag, we would need to make that default behavior because I don't see why.
I guess I was just thinking like it'd be good to avoid adding a whole bunch of new environment options. If this is a more general case of, hey, you want to put some options in your like .rc and some somewhere else, maybe we should generalize the solution rather than adding an option specifically for this.
By generalizing, doing something like Node.rc or what?
Yeah, or I don't know. I mean, if we need to have more than one options environment variable, you could imagine having two of them, right? And one of them is meant for something like in your RC or what you said may be the right answer. I don't know.
We already have environment variables for some of the options.
That is because they precede node options.
Right. Exactly.
Oh.
Right. Like today we basically would be like, no, don't add an environment option because you can use node options.
How would you feel about adding this to node_d? Because we're already using that for like printing information from node itself. I mean, it's a slightly different use case, but
Perhaps I'm overthinking this, and perhaps just a regular node option would be good enough for most of the use cases that I can think of.
Okay, I think given that, like the feedback in the issue is kind of like from the TSC, it's like 7 from the TSC members who've like participated in that poll. It was like 7 for behind an opt-in flag, and 2 always on. So I think that feedback's kind of consistent with what we're talking with here. Is there more that we need to do from the TSC side before we get input from the tooling team?
I don't think so.
Perhaps we could ask people who voted this to be the default behavior, why do they think that this should be a default behavior? Like if we already had this behind a flag, like imagine if we had this if we had a flag that could be used to enable this behavior, would we need to make that a default behavior or not? Or would this be not an issue anymore?
But I think there's already some discussion of that in the issue, and my main understanding of is that if you have to turn it on, you're going to get a lot less usage, and therefore it's not as useful is what I understand people saying.
It's also that if you want to go extra steps to get this, you can already do that. You can already use the inspector API or whatever to get a stack trace from a running process. So like this isn't a question about the feasibility of the feature or anything, but about what the right default is. Like you can already do this without this PR landing.
Yes, much. There's just some sugar to make this simpler to use.
Yeah, and so it's the trade-off is like, does it make it easier for some people to use, but then annoy other people, right? So I think that's the discussion is like which of those two sides makes the most sense in terms of like you get the most benefit from making it easier for people, or do you get a negative benefit, in which case we don't want to do that.
I think that like as I estimate this now, the trade-off is this would do much more damage than good, because very many people will get annoyed with this. Like I think orders of magnitude more than people who would benefit from this.
And I think that's kind of reflected in what's reported in the issue. Like there's more TSC members that are on that side versus the other. But I do think getting more feedback from the tooling team, like they may shed a different light on that. And, it's either more information to convince the people who aren't on that side, or maybe they'll say something that changes the mind
Yes, this
of the
makes
rest of the
sense.
people, right? Okay.
I do think that, okay, so while we may have a way to currently do this, that's not very discoverable because I certainly wasn't really aware of how to do that, at least not off the top of my head.
I'd agree, and it may not be as easy to use either, right?
Right, and the thing is, node options aren't that discoverable either. Like most people don't know about most of the
Yeah.
options.
Also, the whole point, I think, of the Control C behavior, that's what we're talking about, right, is that apps that the writers didn't think had bugs might have bugs. So they kind of have to opt into the behavior. Not so useful. I'm not arguing for it. I'm just saying that I don't feel like opting in is very, very helpful.
I mean, I guess, is it that if it was too annoying, we should just not do it at all versus behind a flag? Because, it doesn't add value in that case. Is that where you're going, Sam? Or I just understanding?
Well, yeah, I mean, I already said this in PR. I think I don't have any problem with enabling it in master and seeing if people hate it. I think Ben makes a good point that the Python community is not screaming about it. And in fact, I used Python for years and I didn't even remember it did that, to be honest. And I never remember it bothering me. So maybe it's no big deal. It's just a change. It's definitely so the problem is getting some kind of feedback from actual users on whether they like it or not. And I think the history of optional features that are hard to discover that you have to turn on is they're not very good ways of getting feedback from the user community. It's not necessarily a solution, but it's just, I think, to recognize that it's not so helpful. I'm worried that we just kind of treat it as a dustbin. It's like, oh yeah, we'll do it. We'll just stick it behind a flag. Then we don't have to say no, but at the same time, it didn't actually deliver value to anybody.
I guess like one way of thinking about it, well, like even though I have an opinion that I think it would be annoying to people, one, if we're willing to deal with the slight amount of pushback from our ecosystem, if we land this and ship it in 13 as default behavior, we will find out in very, very short order if lots of folks are annoyed. And if we're willing to like kind of take that bit of feedback and then revert or change the default, if like if we have a flag to turn it off and we want to just like change the default to the flag, I don't think that that's earth shattering. I don't think that that's like totally breaking for folks, especially if it's on like an uneven version of current. And further, it could very well work as a really great advertisement for the feature. If a bunch of people are angry and then make a like Hacker News thread or something about it.
Yeah,
I would like to try it at least in master before that.
I guess that's my way of saying that, well, I have an intuition about it. It's not a hill I die on, and I think it's reasonable to move forward with it if we're all on the same page about, changing the defaults if that's the pulse we get from the community.
Yeah, I think if we should, I think, now that we've thought of it, getting some feedback from the tooling team makes sense because they may give us an advance, either better comfort that we won't get immediately negative reaction or that, yes, we will. And depending on that, maybe what you suggest does make sense, right? I don't know, maybe somebody, or I mean, parallel, somebody could propose that in the issue itself as the path forward. Any, are we happy? Should we have more to discuss? Are we happy to like either have somebody jump in with that suggestion or wait for feedback from the tooling team? Silence is.
But I like Miles's suggestion. If he proposed it, I'd give it a big thumbs up.
I can just add that in a comment to the thread.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. Okay, so let's move on to the next issue, which is stream don't emit error after destroy 29.197. Just opening that one as well.
I think this can be removed from the agenda for now.
Okay, so is it discussions continuing in the issue?
Discussion's continuing. The PR has been updated. Sam pointed out that it's now out of sync with the title of the issue, and I don't think there's contention that requires our meeting input anyways. Of course, regular input is always welcome.
Okay. So unless anybody says objects, I will just note that in the minutes and remove it from the agenda. And add the comment as to why. Remove, discuss. Removed from agenda. Okay, thanks for that update. So then moving on to the next issue, which is build ongoing list of actions for Python 3 compatibility. That is on there mostly as a tracking issue. I know that last week Klaus had identified a few specifics in terms of blocking issues. I don't have a new update this week. I don't know, Sam, if you have you seen anything on that front?
Yeah, I think it's too soon for a new update. It's a couple more things landed. I'm going to check today. A few more things. Other things might be ready to land. I think the big thing that someone needs to look at, and I'm planning to do that when I get some time, is there needs to be changes in Node.js. They get published. They go into NPM. That then show up in Node for some of the pass. So there is a kind of one longish loop out through the ecosystem that has to close before we'll get green on CI for Python 3. And that might be the last remaining kind of technical issue going from memory here for having the node build with Python 3. So it's not so bad, actually. And then the next major issue, just throwing it in here, is how do we test this? I mean, the obvious way is we duplicate every single test we do on all of our platforms with Python 2 and Python 3. But that's also the kind of slam your head into the forehead kind of, or your forehead into the wall kind of way. So
I don't think we can duplicate it, but it's kind of like if we do a nightly run, would it be 2 or would it be 3, right?
Yeah, I think the nightly run is a good idea. So we talked about it a little bit, Michael.
Yeah.
But there'll have to be some sort of consensus and discussion in GitHub on how we're going to approach this. And so far, we've been focusing just on making it actually work. Because if it doesn't work, talking about how we're going to test it is a bit.
Agreed.
But we're getting close to that point.
Okay, that sounds good. So if nobody else has anything to add, we'll move on to the next issue, which is remove legacy parser 29.589. I think Anna, you added that.
Yeah, that's me. I don't know. So I can give a basic rundown of this, but I also added a comment at the end of the issue to explain what this is about and why we need DSC input. So the idea is to remove the legacy HTTP parser from our source code and only use LLHTTP going forward. And the question that we need to decide on is whether this is December major and whether we wanted to land in Node 12 or not. And So like LHTTP has been pretty stable by now. There have only been 2 bug reports, and none of them in the last 3 months since we switched to it as the default in Node 12. And so like the upside of merging this PR into 12 is that we need to maintain HTTP parser for 1 year less. The downside is that, if there are issues, we can currently tell people, hey, use the CLI flag to revert to the old parser for now as a workaround. And so I think Sam was in favor of this being Semver major, and Matteo and James were at least leaning towards it. But I think they also said that they would be okay with landing it as a minor if the TSC is fine with it.
Yeah, I'd agree. It sounds Semver major. I guess it's the benefit of getting it back to 12 is that outweigh the risk.
Anna, could I ask a quick question?
Sure.
I don't know I don't have the history memorized. Has there been an LTS in which LLHTTP is the default?
No, it was only introduced in 11, I think, and since 12, it's the default.
Right. I feel I'm a big fan of deleting code that we've deprecated or don't need anymore in a fairly orderly way. So I guess I like Myles's phrase. This is not a hill I'm going to die on, but I feel like if it gets to be default for all of 12, and nobody reports any problems, and we don't expect there to be problems, then to delete it in 13 just strikes me as orderly and expected, and
okay.
That's how I feel. But it, if it's been running and nobody cares, and there's never been a reason to turn on this, I just can't see what the hurry is personally. As long as we do it, reasonably soon.
I mean, it's not so much about like removing code as soon as possible, as it is about like having to maintain a kind of hard to maintain library for 1 more year, even if there are security issues popping up. I think that's.
So what if we split the difference, Anna? So we do have a policy for LTS that for security purposes, we can land Semver major changes as Semver minor. So just kind of spitballing here, take it or leave it. What if we did a Semver minor landing? I don't know if there already is a warning if you use the experimental loader, but make it extremely clear in the warning if there is one, or add one, that this is not supported, that it's deprecated, and it's subject to removal in the case of security problems. And then if we find ourselves in a case where there is a significant security problem, then we remove it at that point. My biggest concern is just.
Oh, sorry, Myles. You said loader, but you meant HTTP parser, right?
Yeah, that's what I meant. I meant the parser.
Okay, just to be clear. Sorry.
Yeah. My only concern with just removing it is that had we done this when we cut 12, or had we done it further out from the LTS, we would have had some time to kind of figure out what the implications of removing it would be to the ecosystem.
I don't think that makes any difference. In practice, nobody uses the old parser.
Right,
that's
so
pretty much just a fact, at least on Node 12.
But do we know that 100% that no one's using that flag and no one's using that parser in production?
I mean, it boils down to what we said earlier. People don't generally know about HTTP flags or about CLI flags unless they are told about it.
But if someone's upgrading from 10 to 12 and they hit an edge case in the parser that they weren't expecting, or a slight change in logic, I could see a company who's trying to upgrade from 10 to 12 having to use that flag to be able to upgrade their service.
Temporarily, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah, and additionally, if a major security hole does present itself, then that company will also have every motivation to switch to the new parser, which will be underscored by our warning saying that we're going to drop this parser. So I think that these corner case companies, so to speak, they actually support your point, which is, if I understood correctly, to keep it around unless a big security hole comes up. In which case, dropping it is in their interest too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I hear the proposal is that we would leave it as December major, add a warning if people are using the old parser that basically says, warning, this could be deleted.
I wouldn't add the warning. Like,
No.
it's okay, we should say this December major. And like,
Why wouldn't you add the warning if almost no one is using that, and the warning would probably not harm in the situation described with when some company is upgrading from 10 to 12? What's wrong with adding a warning there?
Well, it's more work for somebody.
Did you say add the warning back? I don't think, is there a warning now?
No, there is no warning
there's
now.
no warning.
No, I did not say add warning back. I said, like, what's the downside of adding a warning?
The downside is that there's practically speaking, there's already pretty much no difference between the old and the new parser. And so adding a warning just adds friction that shouldn't need to be there. And if somebody actually wants to opt into the old behavior, then that is something they do explicitly and that they want to do. So.
But if we plan to remove that, we usually add runtime deprecations for removals when possible.
But this is not an API change. This is an implementation detail change. This is like this is even far less than a V8 upgrade, and we do these release lines too. Yeah.
I mean, how many security problems related to the HTTP parser have we had, like in the last year, that we had to update, that were in that piece of code versus other pieces?
A few.
A few, yeah.
Okay. So it's like, if we got one in the extra year that we had 12, would we tell people, sorry, you have to, you have to move up because we're now just deleting it, or would we try and fix it? If people are basically at bigger risk than they might expect, the warning could help in that respect, in terms of like, you're using this, but this might cause you problems. If we'd probably just fix it, then the warning probably doesn't make sense in my mind.
Well, I'm not sure. So the problem is, like, that train of thought can be applied to any API that's used less, right? The more people you have using something, the more likely you're to discover a problem with it.
True.
So, well, yeah. And I mean, so while there have been like a few security issues with it, I mean, a few might make up like the bulk of our security issues anyways. It's not like we have that many.
Yeah. I guess also, I was coming from the, if the answer, if there is a security vulnerability is to delete it, some advance warning that you're using something that might happen might be fair, versus if we're actually just going to try and fix it anyway, then, okay, fine, right?
Well, where it exists, if there's some issue is noticed, some amount of maintenance is going to be done to it, I presume. I mean, we still treat it like anything else. If security so if it is used in, say, an LTS branch like 10 where it still exists, and I think it might still be the default in 10 anyways, and there's a security issue with it there, we're still going to deal with that.
Right. Well,
but if it doesn't exist, there would be no reason like in a branch that it doesn't exist in, there'd
Right.
be no reason to do anything about it because, well, it's not going to exist.
No, but Myles' proposal was that basically we don't delete the code, but we actually say if we ran into a security release, a security problem, we would consider deleting.
I don't see what benefits that has, and I see the downsides.
I guess the
Like,
benefit was
like if you have people that are using it, and then you get a security problem, and then you're like, well, we'll just remove it. Well, I don't think people are going to be very happy, unfortunately.
I guess
Right.
the premise that I was building on there was that we don't have people who want to maintain it right now. And the reason for removing it now would be kind of defensive against this scenario. So instead of like defensively removing it, still leave that option in LTS for people who need it, but include with it a very clear warning saying, if this situation we want to defend against happens, it will be removed. Because we
people
also
need it?
do have prior art from a, like, if one of the questions too is removing an API or removing this as a Semver major, whether or not that is kind of like aligned with our historical process, we do have historical process of landing Semver major changes as Semver minor and security releases. So it's, you know, like very in line with our process and very much in line with the way that we've done things before.
And besides, very
Fair.
few people will see this warning, right? Because we are assuming that very few people are using this parser, right? So
Yeah.
it will be a warning to them. So there should not be like an uproar if and when we drop this. It'll be inconvenient for them, but they will have been warned.
And we could be relatively specific that would only happen after 10 goes out of service, because that up until that point, we're probably going to have to fix it there anyway, right?
I get.
Actually, I think Michael makes a really good point. We can't really get out of our obligation to maintain it for a while.
But can we cut off that last year is the remaining question, right?
It sounds like we should probably try to, because it's not going to be a good situation if no one wants to or can or etc. maintain this thing, especially when there's a replacement.
So,
And as far as I can see, like I'm not really, maybe I'm not deep enough into the details, but I'm not really clear on who or how many people like really need this. It doesn't seem like many people do, because I haven't seen many people complaining.
No.
And
So then maybe
I certainly do not know of anyone who has run into issues, aside from issues that have already been reported to the main repository.
I guess, Anna, to your point then, and maybe this is the flip side of it, if we can reach consensus on landing this now, and we could even land it as a security release. Anyways, I won't get into that, but like landing it now does also make this explicit thing saying, hey, going from 10 to 12, this is something that you're going to have to change. And then kind of acts as a forcing function for people having to upgrade sooner.
Right. The one challenge with that is, you know, people who've been doing their proper due diligence have tested things out for the last 4 or 5 months on the assumption that there's no Semver breaking thing in 12. It's you know, it's a timing thing, right? Like to do that a month before we've already got our first RC out, to now drop something in 12, it seems just too late, to be fair to people, to say, well, okay, as of 12 next month, you can't use this anymore, even though you've tested it out, everything was good.
I feel like this discussion isn't really going anywhere, or at least it isn't like useful compared to what the actual issue is. It's like if we don't land the PR in 12, I'm fine with that. It's okay. It's just this isn't a huge deal, and if we decide to put a warning or something, feel free to open a PR about that. Like if somebody feels strongly about that.
That makes sense to me. So let's basically, we're saying let's make it Semver major and leave it at that.
Yeah, I'm
this
with that.
discussion.
I feel like that is not the ideal outcome, but it's also not worth arguing about. Like really, it isn't.
Any other comments, suggestions? Everybody okay with that? Okay, I think if there's no
I
objections.
don't know. It did
Oh,
sound
go
like
ahead,
we were
sorry.
making some amount of consensus on once 10 is end of life. If we have a security problem with it, we may still decide to do something with this in existing release lines where it is a secondary option. Maybe I was misunderstanding like what people's opinions on that were, but it seemed like
Right.
there was
Yeah.
some consensus there.
Yeah, so at that point it is a security issue, right? And then at that point it may be somewhere minor, right? No matter what the state of the various release lines is, right? That's my understanding. So then at that point, yes, we can just drop it. That is a potential fix for a security issue, is to just remove the code that causes it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also depending on how we want to do it, if this happens during the life cycle of 10, we could always choose earlier rather than later that the solution for 10 is to patch it, but the solution for 12 is to remove it.
I mean, that's unlikely to be like to make a lot of sense if the issue is in the parser only, but yeah. I think anything works at this point because the difference between the two parsers, between using them, really isn't big at all.
Yeah, like we probably won't run into any problem is the answer, right?
Yeah.
And that, you know, if we get faced with something where 10's out of service, there's a huge amount of work to fix it in 12 and everybody's using the other parser, we can, you know, make the hard decision at that point.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, the only last thing that comes to mind is maybe we want to do a little bit of evangelization if it makes sense to say, please don't be using this. We could like do a blog post or I don't know what, if we think that makes any sense. Just back to the comment of, you know, command line isn't necessarily discoverable. I don't know if there's a more discoverable way to say, hey, you know, you can use this for now, but be aware.
I think that's the warning, really.
Yeah, that's, if we want that, that's the warning.
Okay. So basically, we're back to if somebody feels strongly about the warning, submit a PR to add it, right?
Yep, I think that's pretty much it.
And the warning can even come in a future Semver minor release. Like it's not even something we need to rush to get in there. For what it's worth, like obviously we'd want to do it sooner rather than later, but
Sure.
you know, it's something that could be bundled into a future security release or a future Semver minor release. The sooner the better, but it is something that could come later.
Yes, that makes sense.
Okay, so any other comments, thoughts before we move on to the next issue? Okay, if not, let's move on. So the next one is depths update V8 to 7.8. And I believe, Sam, you added that?
Yeah, though maybe you'd be a better one to summarize it because it came out of our conversation, Michael.
Sure.
I think you have memorized the V8 versions and stuff better than I do.
Okay, so my understanding of that one is that there's an issue basically compiling V8 version 7.8 on Mac OS. The issue is that we're using an older version of the Xcode tools, and so it'll compile fine with the newer tools. The challenge is though that, you know, to move to a later version of Xcode tools means a bunch of work on the build side. You know, we either need a separate set of machines with the newer version of Xcode, or we need to figure out how you get two versions of Xcode on a single machine. And, you know, right now, I don't think we have anybody who's got the time or cycles to make that happen in time for 13.
Do we have a cutoff date for 13?
the 21st is the Semper Major cutoff, and the discussion is that, like, you know, basically changing the level of the Xcode version. You know, at least one person was suggesting that should be Semper Major, and I kind of agree with that as a general approach.
So I talked to someone from the V8 team about this today. It seems like, and then Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, like is it the use of new language features from C++ that's causing this?
I believe that's correct. Like there was at least one case where like they made a code change and then it was okay, but then there were other places that it failed. So it was kind of like you could work through all those, but again, that's a bunch of work too, right?
Yeah. So I can follow up again and try to see if I can get someone from the V8 team maybe to put some cycles on this in the next 48 hours to try to see if we, at the very least, can get a patch on top of it. I wonder, just as a thought, Michael, would you feel comfortable from the build team changing what the minimal supported compiler is, even if it's not what we're using in our infrastructure today, under the pretense that we plan to update it over the next couple months? Mostly what I'm thinking about here would be if we can do like a patch job right now of like finding a patch that can unroll these things today. And then that gives us a bit of time to roll out the new infrastructure. Well, if we were to update to 7.9 during the life cycle of 13, we would be in a good place. Do you think that that's something that we could do?
I'm comfortable with that. Like, and you know, we've done that for, you know, at least one platform where we said like, hey, here's the minimum compiler, but we haven't managed to get the compiler up to that. So we'd want to get consensus in the build team, but I think changing the minimum, even though we're not there yet, I'm okay with.
Okay. If you're good at chasing down changing the minimum, I can chase down someone here or potentially even find some time myself to see if I can get that so that we can hopefully get a patch on top of this so we can at least get it building on our infrastructure to land it.
Yep. Okay. That makes sense to me. I'll comment in the issue to the effect that the proposal is that, you know, we update, the proposal is we update our minimum in the docs and, you know, then, but in this case, patch, you know, assume that if we're going to be able to land 7.8, we need to patch it and go from there. Any other discussion comments on that one before we move on?
That sounds perfect to me. I got no problem with that.
Okay, sounds good. So let's say the next one is moderation team recertification number 408. Rich, who couldn't make it today, but he did a good job of summarizing I'm going to find it in the issue for this meeting. So I'm just going to pop back to there. Hold on. Basically, his comment here is that based on, you know, asking people who's still involved and looking at that, you know, the recommendation is that we recertify at Benjamin, BNB, LJ Harb, Omnithyme, and Ryan Murakarami. I will paste those in the chat, and that the other people on the second list I'm pasting in, of course, now they both look the same, but you know, basically that those people have either self-identified or not responded, so that we should remove them. So let me, I'm gonna remove and recertify, just so that it's a little more clearer. So we don't have, we have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we have nine participants. So we don't have enough as a straight out vote, but let's say, is anybody in opposition to that recommendation? Yeah, I think I'd have to go back and look, but I think we've got in our governance that the TSC recertifies the moderation team once a year. So we've done it. We did this last year. We did it last year. We did it last year, and so this is the repeat for this year. So unless unless anybody speaks up or lets me know afterwards, I'll add to the issue that the people who were present in the meeting voted +1 for recertification, and then we'll ask the rest of the team members to vote in the issue itself. Okay, so I think that's the end of our agenda. Now, just as a reminder, Myles did ask that we all stick around for something fairly quick. So let me stop the live stream.